I feel like we need to talk about The Zombie Survival Guide by Max Brooks. Now, I remember getting this book when I was a teenager, and I read the shit out of it. Here's my copy. It looks like it's been through a zombie outbreak at this point. I also read World War Z and thoroughly enjoyed it too. Now, with it said that I liked both of these books, can we stop referencing this guide as if it's a genuinely good guide to survive zombies? Honestly, if you took the advice from this book, you'd die. I get that this was written as an entertaining piece of fiction, a tongue-in-cheek take on survival guides and zombies, but yet I still see people in comments and forums and such whenever the topic of zombie survival comes up, referencing this book to refute sensible arguments, as though this is some sort of survival Bible. You could say zombies don't exist, so you survive automatically, and if that is what you say, I bet you also get off by smugly telling people wrestling is fake. Now, I realize that we are talking about zombies, living dead cannibals of ghoulish fiction that don't exist and don't need to be taken seriously as a threat. But if we're going to ask the hypothetical question, how would you survive a zombie outbreak, we should really think it through more honestly, and I don't quite feel that this book does that question justice. So, in this series, I'm going to go over this book and why it's wrong, why it's right, or what it's overlooked. A lot of my own thoughts on the matter inbound. This is not a book review, and I won't necessarily go over every line. I will summarize huge portions at my own discretion, and if you want to know just what exactly is said in this book, verbatim, get the book.
Seems fairly obvious. Whoa. Wrong book.
To start with, The Zombie Survival Guide was written with the conceit that its author lives in a fictional reality exactly like our own, but zombies are a genuine extant threat that must be dealt with every so often and have the realistic potential of ending the world as we know it. I may refer to the fictional author from time to time, and I will be calling him Bax Brooks, my own original character. Don't steal! As a result of Bax living in this world, all the information on the function of zombies is treated extremely matter-of-factly with no variance, despite also often saying there is no evidence for why, how, or indeed even if something works/could work. I personally see this as the first major weakness of this book as a survival guide, also a bit of a weakness of this book from a more meta perspective. Max Brooks could easily have just settled on definitive answers to these questions and even done some good world building with them while he was at it, but I guess he didn't feel like it?
Nah, I don't really feel like it.
A significant portion of the information on how ghouls works is just Bax Brooks guessing shit. There's also a lot of extremely specific information that many later segments rely on heavily to be viable. Literally, the exact footsteps per second of a ghoul is listed here. In the fictional world the story is written in, that may be fine, as genuine evidence exists that these assumptions are correct, but for the paranoid reader concerned with being munched on by zombie Flanders, it is dangerous to build everything around one very specific set of assumptions. Imagine you've dedicated your entire life to zombie survival, and all your planning, training, purchasing, and building were all under the assumption that when the zombie apocalypse finally came, it would be the classic Romero shambling zombie. But then a Left 4 Dead hunter vaulted over your 10-foot walls like Edwin Moses jumping a hurdle, ending your years of preparation mere minutes into the apocalypse. For this reason, I think it is important that we cast at least a slightly wider net. Zombies are an inescapable cultural icon, toned with gritty realism and cartoonish ridiculousness alike, appearing in games, books, movies, comics, shows, show games, and anything in between. There's a veritable horde of zombie media, and what classifies as a zombie itself is very loose as a result of just the sheer, absolute volume of zombie stories. From radiation, curses, microbes from Mars, viruses, unspecified bioweapons, parasitic lifeforms, voodoo, alien technology, fungus, bad chicken nuggets, and tainted gas station food, the sources of zombies are themselves quite numerous, each with different symptoms, abilities, weaknesses, mutations, and infection vectors. So it seems a bit silly to only cover one very, very specific type of zombie, as Max Brooks does. Although, to be fair, he does bring up voodoo zombies, but not how to survive them, obviously, so for that and other reasons, it isn't really relevant to this conversation. Now, obviously, I couldn't possibly cover every single type of zombie from every representation ever seen, as there would be thousands more written by the time I covered those that already exist. Most zombies also share at least several features in common, making covering each one individually somewhat redundant. Also, frankly, there are a good few zombie or zombie-like monster apocalypses that are just plain impossible to survive. Check out Wow Such Gaming for a series on exactly which you would probably or probably not survive in broad terms.
Why you wouldn't survive a Left 4 Dead zombie apocalypse.
So, what we're going to do here is break down 3 different common or more believable zombie types.
1, I can count to 1!
The classic, the slow, brain-hungry, shambling Romero/Walking Dead living corpse capital Z zombie. You can't talk zombie survival without bringing these old school zombies into it. These are also basically the type of zombie covered by the Zombie Survival Guide, so gotta at least include these. I'll be calling these ones ghouls for the sake of distinguishing them from the other 2 types. These, also being the old school classic, have most of the usual zombie tropes associated with them. Unlike the Zombie Survival Guide, however, ours will not be viral in nature. More on that later.
2, I can count to 2!
Ever since I saw the Dawn of the Dead remake around age 10, my thoughts were somewhere along the lines of, what? No, that's just not fair at all. In retrospect, it's funny how much of a difference is made by giving zombies the speed of their living former selves all on its own. However, I feel like we can take this a bit further, as a lot of movies like 28 Days Later already have done, by having these particular zombies not even be undead, just
Infected.
which is how I will be referring to them henceforth. I'll be covering these ones not only because they are among the more believable and common in zombie fiction, again 28 Days Later, Quarantine, etc., but also the fast, agile zombie, undead or otherwise, itself is common. So, some form of running zombie had to be covered.
3, I can count to 3!
The cordyceps zombie. A relative newcomer to the world of zombie media, to my knowledge only explored in The Last of Us and The Girl with All the Gifts. The fun thing about these zombies is that they actually exist among insects. But it gives us a third and somewhat believable zombie threat to work with, and also has some more alien aspects which will be a bit of fun to cover while not commonly overlapping with the other zombie types. Also, if you want a really in-depth look at The Last of Us or Girl with All the Gifts Cordyceps, Roanoke Gaming has a really solid series, check him out.
But how does this specific fungus overcome the human immune system and conquer the brain? Is there anything based in reality, and what is the lore behind it? Well, strap in, because this is almost exactly my area of expertise concerning diseases and outbreaks.
I'll be mostly calling these fungal zombies, as it is faster and easier to type and say than cordyceps zombies. That and because I'm such a fun guy.
I can't count no more!
Now, in the Zombie Survival Guide, Max Brooks goes on for a considerable length of the book, going into considerable depth into all the specific abilities of ghouls, such as they can see, and are maybe psychic for some reason. I guess he's acknowledging that zombies that are basically skeletons still attack people in some movies, but if you're going to go through the work of establishing your own very specific zombie rules and abilities in your own fictional universe where zombies are a well-studied biological phenomenon, just why bother with that? It doesn't really come up, and it literally says there's no evidence one way or the other in the book, so just maybe Max Brooks was adding padding to his guide to cover for the lack of hard facts about how the virus works? Ghouls. Ghouls, where do they come from? Space radiation, viral infection? Generally in zombie fiction, the origin doesn't really matter all that much, even when it is known, to the point that it is often just outright ignored.
And as we now know, the phenomenon resulted from the use of highly
Initial claims that the virus was caused by rage-infected monkeys have now been dismissed as bull.
Even in the Zombie Survival Guide when you get down to it. So, that's what we're gonna do here. One day life is business as usual, and then the next, bam, there's zombies. Honestly, would barely surprise me with how 2020 went. How do you become a ghoul? The classic image of the iconic zombie digging itself from its grave would imply anyone dead anywhere is now a zombie, Walking Dead rules. But to be fair to Max Brooks and not change the rules too much, as in his book, if you die of unrelated causes prior to infection, you will not zombify. Not a horrible loss, as the dead and buried wouldn't be getting out of those graves anytime soon anyway. Most of those corpses would be pretty well rotten, locked in a box 6 feet underground. So, to get infected, you just get bitten or get the fluids of the zombie in your system. It is worth noting that in the Zombie Survival Guide, zombies are made by a completely biological means, specifically the solanum virus. But frankly, that makes no sense. No virus is 100% communicable with no naturally immune people, and any infective dose, no matter how small, being enough, as described in the book. It is also worth noting that the classic undead zombie is literally a walking corpse. A zombie does not need their heart, lungs, or anything else except the brain. As soon as the heart stops, the blood will stop flowing, and once you're stiff and dead, there's no more moving you can possibly do. So we're not even gonna try to justify a virus reanimating your flesh. Honestly, I think Max chose a mysterious virus because it could be taken more seriously than eating a bad Krusty Burger or a voodoo curse, especially because he specifically sarcastically dismisses voodoo curses and magic on the whole while talking about an undead monster.
There are no curses, son! There must be a scientific explanation!
In introducing the virus, the whole first 4 pages boil down to
virus makes zombie in 23 hours, from bite or zombie blood in your blood, no animal zombies.
He doesn't really explain anything about where it came from or how the virus works, and that's because it obviously wouldn't. But just interview a virologist for some good-sounding mumbo-jumbo medical jargon to at least make it sound like it's a thing, at least. There's a lot of, there's no evidence yet to determine, or it is currently unknown why, in this manual written by someone in this world with access to scientific research on the undead if they're made by a non-supernatural cause. Naturally, I'm going to go a lot faster than he did covering our 3 types.
Must go faster.
Like I said earlier, the source of zombification doesn't matter here. If you get bit, you die within a day, you come back. For some reason in the book, eating a zombie just permakills you instead of zombifying you. Frankly, I think that makes no sense if getting their blood in your mucous membranes would infect you, so we're ignoring that. I know it isn't viral here, but between werewolves, ghouls, and vampires, I think a bodily fluid transferable curse is an idea we've been comfortable with for quite some time. It's not an infection that can be fought with medication. You can't cut off a limb to stop the spread. It's magic. Fuck you.
Son, there better not be any walking dead up there!
Provided that its sensory organs are intact, we will assume a ghoul is able to make full use of them, again, despite being dead. Unlike the zombie survival guide, we will say that ghouls do have tactile sense and are just entirely unfazed by pain. Touching a zombie from behind would thusly alert it to your presence, and a zombie with no other senses could feel around for victims. The undead are able to distinguish between the living, the reanimated, and the just plain dead. Ghouls go for animals, or indeed anything not undead that moves and makes noise. However, animals cannot be reanimated. Human ghouls only. Ghouls will also prioritize living targets over corpses, but will still eat the dead who were not bitten before death. As long as they have intact lungs, we'll assume they're capable of moaning and groaning their undead disposition. As for the strength of a ghoul, we'll assume that they possess the strength they had in life, minus any injury they have since suffered. A one-armed ghoul is obviously not as strong in the missing arm as they were when they had it. A ghoul whose biceps have been eaten would simply not be capable of the same arm movements as one with them intact. A ghoul cannot move or use any part of their body which has been removed from their body. These ghouls are still slower than most people, as generally ghouls are shown to be disoriented, stiff, and clumsy. Zombies have an overall inability to use higher-order thinking, lack coordination, and thus have difficulty producing the quick, nimble, and precise movements necessary to maintain running. All of this implying frontal lobe damage. Any ghoul with significant leg or spine injuries will obviously be impacted in their movement as well. These ghouls will rot, but as in the zombie survival guide, we'll say that the supernatural nature of the ghoul keeps decomposers from getting to work on them, allowing a ghoul to rot slower than a usual corpse. They don't technically need to eat, they just want to. They don't need to breathe, they don't need water. They're just a good old-fashioned walking corpse. One thing I will point out here, the classic rule of killing zombies
by removing the head or destroying the brain
is a bit oversimplified in a lot of zombie media. One very obvious example comes to mind.
I think knives are a good idea. Big, fuck-off shiny ones. Ones that look like they could skin a crocodile. Knives are good because they don't make any noise. And the less noise they make, the more likely we are to use them.
We gotta start using our knives more.
Anyone in The Walking Dead can effortlessly kill a zombie by cleanly sliding any knife of any size or blade shape into literally any part of the head of a zombie. It should go without saying that casually slipping a small blade into a person's head just anywhere wouldn't necessarily kill them, let alone a zombie. Anyone familiar with Phineas Gage will also know that even having a large metal rod jammed through your brain won't necessarily 100% guarantee a kill. Many people, Max Brooks included, say that the frontal lobe is the weak spot of a zombie, but that doesn't really make sense either. Zombies don't have much higher order thinking skill and do have very strong, seemingly involuntary reactions, so it makes much more sense to me that the weak spot of a zombie would actually specifically be the brain stem, or at least any other part of the brain that is not the frontal lobe, which connect to the rest of the body through, you guessed it, the brain stem. This also does mean that sometimes even with a successfully landed attack on the head of the ghoul, it may not kill it, depending on the kind of attack and part of the head struck. Even The Walking Dead says that the brainstem is the weak spot. If you look at the CDC episode, only the brainstem is reactivated. So, like, even by the rules of the show, that shouldn't work! Anyway, this isn't a Walking Dead series, so After having come to this conclusion myself, while doing research for a later episode, I came to find out that apparently the US military agrees with me on the brainstem issue, as is listed in the Pentagon-released Military Zombie Preparation Training Plan, Con-Plan 8888-11. Yes, the military really made an anti-zombie strategy, even if entirely as a hypothetical training exercise. The CDC also released zombie preparedness materials, even a comic, although not really taking it seriously as a hypothetical scenario.
Infected.
With infected, unlike ghouls, the origin for the infected actually matters quite a lot. Specifically, these are going to be viral infected, and we're going with a somewhat rabies-based virus. But we will cherry-pick traits from other viruses and with other tweaks to make it more viable. One specific sequence in the rabies glioprotein is able to inhibit the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in the central nervous system, which causes the aberrant behavior and aggression. Technically, we could have a non-rabies-based virus with the same ability, but I'll be sticking with a rabies-based virus. Now, generally speaking, a virus doesn't want to kill the host. A virus can't survive too long in a corpse, and a corpse isn't usually walking around to continue to spread the infection, so it's bad for business. However, with things like CRISPR, our ability to edit the genetics of organisms is stronger than ever. So we're going to assume for the sake of this that a zombie virus is intentionally engineered, sort of a quarantine situation. So the nature of this virus is specifically designed to give us as close to a zombie experience as we can get. However, even then, it would have some realistic constraints. First among them, the infected are not undead. They are living, breathing humans whose brains are just not working properly as they die of an infectious disease. The thinking power of an infected individual is significantly reduced by swelling in the brain, no longer able to form coherent thoughts or control their emotions. Side effects may include terror, aggression, excessive salivation, nausea, vomiting, muscle spasm, a certain lack of coordination, and hard adrenal responses to stimuli. Interacting with an infected will immediately trigger their fight or flight response, and with their increased irritability and irrational aggression, they will typically fly into a rage and attack. The infected will not always be active, though. If nothing is stimulating them, they will be kind of dormant, most likely wandering around looking for food if they're able to do so, likely ignoring injuries to the point of failure. Being as they are actually living people, the senses of an infected are the same as those of the average living person. However, their brain power is significantly diminished, so they would likely not be nearly as observant as your average uninfected person. I don't know about you, but when I am mentally impaired and in an emotionally excited state, I don't tend to notice things nearly as clearly as when I'm calm and sober. The infected, unlike the ghouls, are able to move quickly, sometimes too quickly or powerfully for their own good. People don't typically have 100% of our human power on tap to prevent us from hurting ourselves, and when the brain decides we're in enough danger, we get a nice healthy dump of adrenaline to get us out of whatever horrible mess we've found ourselves in. But in any given interaction the infected has, this adrenal dump occurs, giving the infected greater physical strength than their victims, all other things equal. Obviously, an infected toddler is still weaker than an uninfected Olympic strongman. The bodies of the infected will quickly start to literally tear themselves apart with the strain they are putting themselves through to attack survivors, or, for that matter, other infected. Yeah, that's right, these zombies are not team players. Friendly fire occurs in human conflict all the time, when we have clearly designated uniforms, laws against it, and ideological, or at least practical reasons not to engage in it, purely by mistake. Emotionally and mentally incapacitated infected wouldn't realistically be able to tell a survivor screaming and swinging a machete for their lives from another infected screaming and flailing at them with the same objective.
Headshot.
Now, the golden headshot rule. Since the infected are not undead, they actually need their organs. All of them. A 20mm to the chest cavity would be an instant kill to the infected, even without any damage done to the brain itself. However, these amped up infected would be able to survive insane amounts of damage in the short term. You could stab one in the guts hundreds of times with your trusty Resident Evil knife as it snacks on your other arm, and though it will die from those wounds, it won't be until long after you do of yours. So, a headshot or taking out the heart are still definitely your best bets. But not only will the infected die from the damage sustained through organ trauma or blood loss, they'll also die of starvation, or more likely thirst, especially with the excessive salivation needed for higher infection rates and the vomiting. Between destroying their bodies to destroy yours, taking defensive wounds from survivors, general clumsiness, exposure to the elements, thirst, hunger, poison, disease, or friendly fire, the infected are the zombie embodiment of the candle burning twice as bright and half as long. Unlike the ghoul, this infection can be spread between humans, bats, rats, dogs, etc. Rabies is not only spread through bites, though. Though biting is certainly the most effective method of spreading rabies, scratches, even those that do not pierce the skin, can cause infection.
Just one bite, one scratch from these creatures is sufficient, and then you become one of them.
A common misconception is that the blood of an infected person would contain the virus and thus be a vector for infection, but there are actually no signs that this is true. So, my favorite character from the 28 Days Later series should actually have been fine. Although actual rabies can take as little as a few days to as much as a few years to get to a stage where you notice symptoms, we are talking about a genetically modified virus, so let's assume that this infection turnaround is between 4 to 10 days. Rabies travels through your nervous system to your brain, and it does so rather slowly. The bloodstream would be a much faster method of deploying the virus through your body, but it would have difficulty passing the blood-brain barrier. As such, even if given a more efficient way to travel through your nervous system to get to your brain and become symptomatic faster, it would actually be slow enough that amputation of an infected limb might actually be effective in preventing zombification of the target. We do know that once a person is infected with rabies, there's basically no saving them. You're not going to be taking any Zombrex to get through it if you catch the big Z, and we'll say the new virus is designed to be unaffected by current rabies vaccines. So, amputation may be your safest option if bitten, assuming you don't die from a botched amputation. Interestingly enough, rabies is shaped like a bullet, so these zombies would actually be made and ended by a bullet to the brain. The final nail of realism in the infected's proverbial coffin would be that the infection rates wouldn't be 100%. Your odds of being infected by normal rabies from contact with a rabid dog is between 0.1 and 60%, depending on the number, depth, and placement of the bites, as well as the stage of infection of the animal, your head or upper body having the highest risk of infection. Now, if we are assuming this virus has been specifically designed to be more infectious, we could assume higher rates, but still not 100%. Let's say that instead of the average 15% chance for infection after contact with a rabid animal, we're looking at an average 60% with contact with an infected. So, more often than not, one bite, you're infected, but not a guarantee. There could also be a certain number of people who would be naturally immune to this strain. The lack of certainty of infection after contact with infected zombies does mean that a lot more people would be willing to hide bites. A lot of other people would likely assume that they had to be bitten to be infected and may later turn from only being scratched or spit on. Both of these factors would lead to more post-conflict surprise infections than ghouls, especially when coupled with the less uniform infection to symptom timeline. This wouldn't be enough to have infection reproduction match that of ghouls, however.
Cordyceps.
Alright. Now for the weird one. The cordyceps or fungal zombie is a strange form of zombie for many reasons, one of which being that it currently exists in the real world, thus earning its place in this set. It infects over 600 different species of insects, arachnids, and even plants. A new form of cordyceps fungus will evolve to infect the dominant form of life in its environment, and there is evidence to support that this fungus has been mind-jacking ants for some 48 million years. It also does not infect by bite, but instead by spores. When a spore finds a host, it infects the target. Mycelium spread through the target's body and brain, then the fungus releases chemicals into the brain of the target, suppressing its ability to resist, while feeding on the target's biomass and driving it towards specific behaviors. In ants, this is seen most commonly as the fungal ant being driven to find a place where conditions are ideal for the growth or spread of the fungus, then clamping its jaws down on a surface to anchor itself in place. There, the fungus kills the ant, converting its biomass into long fungal stems growing out from the ant's head. A few days after initial infection, the stalks begin releasing more spores. Usually the cordyceps lead the ant away from the colony, as other ants within the colony are aware that fungal ants must be killed and disposed of far away from the hill, although the fungal ants are sometimes driven to seek out the colony, placing themselves as adjacent to the hill as possible to die and begin spreading spores. Still, ants are, shockingly, not terribly effective at biohazard containment, and these cordyceps can and do destroy whole colonies. Cordyceps are farmed for health purposes by humans, some costing over $25,000 a kilogram. They are used for dietary health and show promise in being potentially able to even extend human lifespans, with studies producing positive effects in fruit flies. They're also selectively bred and distributed to be used as pest control measures, and have been lab-grown and used as an immunosuppressant in medical procedures for organ transplants since the 1950s. If, by natural or artificial means, a cordyceps developed that could bypass our immune system and survive our body temperature, then it could also believably adapt to our brain chemistry and begin doing to us what it does to so many insects, especially as there are historical examples of humans consuming rye tainted with cordyceps and it driving those who ate the tainted bread crazy, one small girl even attacking her mother with a kitchen knife. It's even suspected that the madness at the Salem witch trials may have been in part the result of eating tainted rye. So, the chemicals released by the cordyceps are already capable of changing our brain functions, just not in so sophisticated or targeted a way as with insects' much smaller, more genetically identical and relatively simple brains. As the cordyceps begin to take over your brain, your inhibitions might be lowered, leading to more risky behaviors. Unchecked emotional responses, poor decision-making, possibly depression, and weak defense against intrusive thoughts or urges, depending on the pre-infection brain chemistry of the target. This would progress and then fade as the cordyceps wrestled control from you entirely. It may also be possible in a short window of time between first symptoms showing to full fungal control for the compromised person to potentially warn fellow survivors of their infection, or maybe even dispose of themselves if they're quick about it. It is worth noting that just offing yourself when infected would still result in your biomass being used to create stalks, furthering infection even in death. And your idea to end it quick before you can cause any harm may not actually be your idea. It may already be the cordyceps' influence. The senses and physical capabilities of the fungal zombie would at initial infection be the same as pre-infection, although these would degrade with the fungus causing swelling in the brain and the progressive internal consumption of the body wasting away at their physical abilities until death. A cordyceps zombie, unlike other zombies, would not necessarily be directly hostile, likely only fighting out of self-preservation or to force themselves into close proximity to large clusters of survivors. Though, just because the fungal zombie doesn't necessarily go out of its way to kill survivors directly doesn't mean that the spores it releases won't, and thus the zombies must be actively hunted down, killed, and disposed of by survivors, and when attacked, they will fight back. Thankfully, we humans are capable of much more sophisticated biohazard containment than ants, although, with what we've been through lately, gotta say, we leave a lot to be desired in that regard. Because the fungus is drugging your body to compel you to spread the infection rather than outright killing you and taking over your corpse with a mind of its own, there is no reason a cordyceps zombie wouldn't know how to operate simple machines like doorknobs, which are almost instinctual to humans to use. Although I personally doubt a cordyceps zombie would be a very effective driver or marksman, not that they may not try anyway. Kind of like the Flood, but again, without a mind of its own. It's just pumping your wet, spongy gray matter with the right chemicals as it snacks on it to turn you into its puppet, still aware of what you're doing, but powerless to stop it. Just like Private Jenkins. We're 2 for 2 on Flood references. Since this form of cordyceps doesn't currently exist, I couldn't guess how far its spores would be able to spread from the stalks grown from the dead, especially as it would be impacted by a number of factors, including case by case, with things like specific location and weather when the fungal zombie dies. although typically this would most likely be above ground in open air for the sake of better spreading of the spores. Still, as with the ants, it may also compel the fungal zombies to die as adjacent to survivor communities as possible, or in unobvious locations to avoid detection. Alright, and with that we've established our own set of zombie threats. Next video is going to be covering the outbreak section of the book, so look forward to that. If you like this, go ahead and feed the YouTube algorithm for me with a like. If you want to be notified when my next video drops, then subscribe and ring the bell. Unless you didn't like this video, in which case, dislike it, not that it'll do anything, and leave me an angry comment. I work a pretty crazy schedule right now, and these videos will almost certainly be demonetized by YouTube, so production is squished into my very limited free time. That said, I am going to try to keep these videos coming on a fairly regular basis, maybe one a month if I can manage it. For now, stay calm, stay safe, and take care.